So many college football people are giving you their list of the top quarterbacks in the country, top running backs, top O-lines, top teams. Well, they missed a bunch of guys who will ultimately end up being some of the best players in 2025. So I'm going to give you the list of the most underrated players in college football who by the middle of the season or by the end of the season, you will know their names and they will finish above all of these other players that they have at the top of the list. So we will start with the quarterbacks, and we are going to start with Dante Moore over at the University of Oregon. And yes, I can hear some of you guys through my screen right now. George, he's a former five-star quarterback at the college that you went to. How is he under the radar? Well, that's my question too, because I'm on your side here. How did this happen? Because ESPN dropped their top 15 returning quarterbacks for 2025. Dante Moore, not on the list. On 3 has dropped 2 different returning quarterback power rankings since the 2024 season ended. Dante Moore, not on either list. But George, Dante Moore didn't start last year. Okay, neither did the number 1 quarterback on 3's list and their most recent list, Arch Manning. Now, how about Pro Football Focus's top 10 list? PFF is data-based, right? Well, Arch Manning is number 6 on that list. How about Brooks Austin from the Film Guide Network on YouTube? No Dante Moore on his list either. Now, that's everybody, right? Or is it possible that there's a reason that Oregon, whose passing offenses have been ranked 12th, 1st, and 11th in the power conferences over the last 3 years, might not have brought in a seasoned starter to compete with the previous year's second string guy for the first time ever? Maybe there's a reason. Maybe a school that's pumped out Heisman Trophy finalists Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel at Oregon with Dan Lanning and Will Stein, maybe they know something that all these list makers don't. Now we're going to pivot on to Braylon Braxton at Southern Miss. Braylon Braxton, he was a starter at Tulsa under Kevin Wilson when he got injured. And his backup, Cardell Williams, came in and lit the world on fire for a couple of weeks. Now, Braxton then transferred to Marshall. Now, let's look at what Braylon Braxton did at Marshall. He put together a hell of a season. Braxton was 3rd in the nation in lowest interception percentage, tossing only 2 picks on 206 attempts. And among the top 10 quarterbacks last year in interception percentage, he was 1st in yards per attempt and 1st in yards per completion. And he was also 2nd in the nation in touchdown percentage, ahead of Cam Ward, who was the 1st overall pick, and John Mateer, and Shedeur Sanders. Now, on top of all that, the kid can run. Braxton had 2 separate 140-yard rushing performances last year on his way to a conference championship. Now he follows his head coach to Southern Miss, where he takes over an offense that is ranked 121st in pass yards last year. And he might end up being the biggest difference maker for a team in college football in 2025. And nobody is talking about the kid. Now we're going to head down to the Big 12, where we have Brendan Sorsby over at Cincinnati. Now, you cannot be a stat watcher on this one because Sorsby was a very good player on a very bad Bearcats team in 2024. He's a big-bodied, composed leader with an NFL arm, and he's decent enough at his footwork and quick arm release, which kept him from spending too much time on his back. Now, I think that Cincinnati knew that they had to upgrade the talent around Sorsby this offseason, and they brought in a bunch of wide receivers to do that while also retaining tight end Joe Royer and team receiving touchdown leader Torrey Johnson. And you know Sorsby is thrilled because he tweets out gifs of himself doing the nay-nay every time the team retains a player or locks in a transfer. Now, the pressure, though, is on their head coach, Scott Satterfield. He has to win after back-to-back losing seasons. And the only way that they're going to do that is to let Brendan Sorsby cook on his way to being one of the names called in the 2026 NFL Draft. Heading out to Big Ten country, Eli Sanders over at USC. Do you know how ludicrous it is to have a starting running back from the University of Southern California on a list of under-the-radar players? Well, part of it is just the way Lincoln Riley has traditionally run his offense. But the reason why I have Eli Sanders on this list is because last year we got to see what USC does when they don't have a mobile quarterback. And Jaquavius Marks got the number of carries that Travis Dye and Marshawn Lloyd should have gotten the 2 years before. Now, for the fourth year in a row, USC has landed its presumptive lead back out of the portal, and Eli Sanders is a no nonsense, one cut, big play running back that is battle tested at both New Mexico and Iowa State. Now, in the last 4 games of New Mexico's season last year, Eli Sanders had 63 carries, 607 yards, 5 touchdowns. And I'm not saying he's going to be able to keep up that pace in the Big Ten, but it might not hurt for Lincoln Riley to make Eli Sanders his first ever 200 carry running back, just in case. Now we're going to head down to SEC country. Rahsul Faison over at South Carolina. Wait till you hear this kid's story, because this is an interesting one. Because Rahsul Faison is a class of 2018 high school graduate. That's right. The same class as Trevor Lawrence, Justin Fields, Micah Parsons, and company. And he did a post-grad year and then went 3 years without getting a single solitary carry in stops at Marshall, Lackawanna Community College, and then at Snow College. Now, it wasn't until his 5th year after graduating high school that he finally got some collegiate JUCO playing time at Snow College. And he did enough in his 88 carries to get a shot at Utah State. Now, in Faison's 2 years at Utah State, yes, we're adding a lot of years on, which are years 6 and 7 after high school. Faison ran all over them kids. He had about 2,000 yards of offense on 350 touches. And thanks to the Diego Pavia rule, he's using his 8th post-grad high school year to head over to the SEC and play alongside the quarterback phenom Lenora Sellers. Now, my 8th year out of high school was my 5th year in the NFL. Do you know how much fun it would have been to go back and run routes and crack some heads against guys who hadn't hit puberty yet when I was at Oregon? I mean, maybe I'm projecting here. And I just don't think that Rahsul Faison could go off in 2025. I want him to because he has persevered. Now we're going to head over to West Virginia, where we got Ty Edwards. Now, this one might be cheating because a running back in Rich Rodriguez's offense is always going to feast. It's just a matter of which one. And he has 3 extremely intriguing options in his first year in Morgantown. Now, you can't call Jaheim White an under-the-radar player. He was a freshman All-America in 2023 and looked almost as good as last year in his sophomore year. Now, I'm going with Ty Edwards, and here's why. Because last year at Jacksonville State, Rodriguez took a transfer from D2 Limestone University in Trey Stewart and ran him for 1,600 yards and 25 touchdowns. Now, this year, he went out and got Ty Edwards, who rushed for 1,000 yards at Northern Iowa last year and was a JUCO National Championship MVP before that. Now, Edwards is 6'2", 240, and has top-end speed around 21 miles per hour. Now, think along the lines of Kalen Ballage, that type of running back who Rich Rod coached against when he was back at Arizona. And that kid ended up in the NFL. Now, he also landed L.J. Turner Jr., another D2 running back out of the state of North Carolina, just like Trey Stewart. So, look, someone is going to go off in this offense, and my bet is going to be on Edwards, but honestly, it might be all 3 of them. Now we got to go to one of the top names in college football, Omega Blake over at Arkansas. Now, here we have a wide receiver who's a transfer from the University of Charlotte, who had 800 yards on just 32 receptions last year. That means the boy was out there cooking. That's literally a quarter of the field eaten up every time Blake catches the ball. And before you question if Blake can hang in the SEC, well, he already spent 3 years at South Carolina before dropping down to get more reps. Now, the kid is a unique body. He's got Rome Odunze's height, but Jordan Addison's weight. He's tall, he's skinny, and I'm not sure that he can be more than a straight line deep threat. But that's exactly what Arkansas needs to replace last year's deep threat, Isaac Tesla, who went in the NFL draft. Now, I believe that Arkansas's quarterback, Taylor Green, is going to love throwing the ball to this kid. And I think SEC defenses that play cover 0 are going to hate his guts and stop playing cover 0. You guys make sure that you guys like, subscribe, get notifications, and tell a friend about the Unafraid show. And if we missed anybody on this under the radar list. If I'm a slot receiver that's playing at a lower level of college football, and then I decide to hit the portal looking for a new home, there's one name that I'm hoping hits me in the DMs, and that is Bill O'Brien, head coach of Boston College. A lot gets said about Bill O'Brien, but I rarely hear anybody acknowledge just how good he is at utilizing and getting the absolute most out of his wide receivers. And I think he's going to find a whole lot of new uses for Rocket Wilkins out of Campbell College. Last year was strange at BC. You had their starting quarterback, Thomas Castellanos, leave in the middle of the season, and the three leading pass catchers were two tight ends and Lewis Bond, who is a wide receiver in a running back's body. Now, VJ Wilkins is a quick twitch, high energy athlete that will have multiple uses and could end up looking a lot like former Texas Tech wide receiver Kike Kute out of Bill O'Brien's Texans offense, which that'd be nice. Now, I'm guaranteeing at least 5 jaw dropping highlights from this kid in 2025. Big 12 fans are going to get sick of hearing the name Javin Whatley out of Arizona. The Wildcats' new offensive coordinator, Seth Dagey, went deep into his bag to find this kid because Whatley is a UT Chattanooga transfer with 3,000 yards of total offense to his name, and the kid was a stud as a multi-sport athlete in Georgia as a high schooler. Sometimes it is fair to wonder if a kid can translate through different levels of play, but Whatley looked good against Alabama, against Nick Saban in his last year in charge down there at Tuscaloosa. And I'm not sure that there's a bigger test of whether you can hang than that, really, right? I mean, he even appeared on last year's Bruce Feldman's Freaks list, having been clocked at better than 22 miles an hour in game situations. Not that's with pads, you're tired, it's hot outside, people chasing you, and he squatted 455 pounds. Now, Whatley is a menace on slant routes, but he can go over the top as well. He can also return kicks. The kid can take a bubble screen to the house. He can run a jet sweep and even throw the ball in a pinch. Now, nobody on earth is going to be able to replace what Teteroa McMillan was last year at Arizona. But their quarterback, Noah Fafita, needs a guy that he can trust in big moments and who he can check the ball down to when pressure is on. And I think Whatley can do both. Griffin Wilde is a name that you should watch over at Northwestern. Now, it seems like South Dakota State's entire roster followed Jimmy Rogers to Washington State, but Griffin Wilde didn't. So, fingers crossed. Why is that? Why Northwestern? What 1,000-yard wide receiver looks at Northwestern and says, yep, that's where I'm going to go make my mark? Well, why would an FCS national championship winning wide receiver go to a Big Ten school that threw 7 touchdowns last year? Good question. Well, maybe because he's following his offensive coordinator, Zach Lujan, whose offense led the FCS in passing efficiency last year. That is a pretty good reason. And Griffin Wilde might end up one of the most productive receivers in the Big Ten next year. And I'd be willing to bet that he is not somebody that's named that is known by 99% of college football fans in the country. Javonnie Gibson out of Oklahoma is a name to watch because the Sooners revamped their entire offense. And in doing so, they're going to need weapons for their all-star stud quarterback, John Mateer. And I think that Arkansas Pine Bluff transfer Javonnie Gibson could be one of those weapons that makes a name for himself in the SEC. Gibson has the size at 6'3", 205. And at the FCS level, dude was a menace, collecting 1,200 yards and 9 touchdowns in 2024. He also, honestly, is a bit of a late bloomer and was listed as a tight end that only had 15 catches his senior year before going to an HBCU and then becoming one of the fastest wide receivers to reach 1,000 yards in college football last year. See, that late bloomer thing. Now, this is a little bit of a long play because unlike a lot of the other players on this list, Gibson has multiple years of eligibility left. And maybe Oklahoma fans are a little bit nervous about not getting a much bigger name out of the portal with better pedigree to support John Mateer. But I think with his height and physicality, that by the end of 2025, we'll see Gibson moving the chains on a regular basis. Terrance Carter Jr. tight end at Texas Tech. Now, y'all know I got to show the tight end some love. And there's arguably a lot of guys that are going to be slept on this year, just like Justin Jolly over at NC State, Miles Kitselman over at Tennessee. Now, what you really need to look out for this year is Terrance Carter Jr., who comes to Texas Tech from the University of Louisiana. Texas Tech prioritizes tight ends in the portal. And last year, they got 10 touchdown receptions out of the tight end position. Now, adding Terrance Carter, who had almost 700 yards receiving last year, is going to be a huge help for Baron Morton and this Red Raiders offense. Now, according to PFF, Pro Football Focus, Carter has 18 forced missed tackles and 606 yards after contact since 2023. Get this man the ball and watch the kid work. As a bonus player on this list, I wanted to add Alabama walk-on tight end transfer Peter Knudson to this list. Truth be told, no Alabama player should ever be considered under the radar, but Knudson is a special case. He's a former Idaho State Player of the Year at quarterback in high school. Then he went to Weber State and switched positions to linebacker. And then when asked to, he switched to tight end when they needed him to. And now he heads to Tuscaloosa, where almost every tight end on last year's roster is gone. So this dude might play. And there will be nothing more fun than a guy who went from FCS linebacker to SEC tight end and making a name for himself. And that's the list of the offensive players that are under the radar that you might not have heard about, but you will by the end of this season. Make sure that you guys like, subscribe, get notifications, and tell a friend about the Unafraid show because we got dope stuff all over the place.